The grave was sealed, but the air still crackled with unfinished business. Mama Aken stood like a statue, her hands caked in dirt, her eyes locked onto the mound of earth that now held her son. The villagers shuffled away, casting nervous glances at the knives glinting inside the coffin. An open declaration of war against the unseen forces that had stolen Aken's life. Chidi trembled beside her, her sobs muffled by the wind, but Mama Aken's silence was louder than any scream. She had buried a son today, but she would not bury justice. As night fell, the village held its breath. The usual sounds of crickets and distant laughter were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. Mama Aken knelt by the hearth, her fingers tracing the edge of a rusted blade. "The dead do not forget," she whispered, and the flames flickered as if in agreement. Chidi, watching from the shadows, felt a chill crawl up her spine. Her mother's grief had transformed into something far more dangerous, a weapon sharper than any knife. Uncle Karu woke with a start, his throat dry, his heart pounding. The dream had been the same. Aken standing at the foot of his bed, his mouth sewn shut with coarse thread, his eyes screaming what his lips could not. Karu laughed it off, pouring himself a drink, but his hands shook so badly the liquor spilled. "Superstition," he muttered, but the word tasted like a lie. Outside, a dog howled, and the wind carried the faint scent of decay. By morning, the village was buzzing. The Dibia who had crafted the death charm was found writhing in his hut, his skin peeling away like old bark. "It wasn't me," he shrieked, clawing at his arms. "The boy's spirit is here." Karu scoffed, but when he returned home, his own reflection in the water jar wasn't his. It was Aken's, grinning with broken teeth. He smashed the jar, but the laughter followed him into the dark. The land, once fertile, began to rot. Crops withered overnight, their roots blackened as if dipped in poison. The villagers whispered of curses, but Mama Aken walked through the dying fields with a grim smile. "The earth knows," she said, pressing her palm to the cracked soil. "It remembers the blood spilled upon it." That night, a child swore she saw Aken's ghost kneeling in the field, his fingers digging into the dirt like claws. Karu's allies turned on him. The elders, who had once turned a blind eye, now spat at his feet. "You brought this upon us," they accused. Even his wife packed her things and left, her final words a hissed warning. "The dead do not rest when they are angry." Karu stood alone in his empty hut, the walls whispering his name. Outside, the wind carried the sound of a knife being sharpened. Chidi awoke to the sound of scratching at the door. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. And then, silence. When she dared to look, a single knife lay on the threshold, its blade stained with fresh blood. Mama Aken picked it up without a word, her eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "He's testing us," she said, "but we will not break." That same night, Karu's hut went up in flames. The villagers rushed to put out the fire, but the flames burned unnaturally blue, refusing to be tamed. Karu staggered out, his clothes smoldering, his face twisted in terror. "He's here!" he screamed, pointing at the empty air. The crowd parted as Mama Aken stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "You should have feared the living, not the dead." The village gathered at the sacred baobab tree, their faces tense. Karu, now a shell of a man, collapsed at the elder's feet. "I did it," he rasped, his voice raw from smoke and guilt. "I killed my brother. I cursed Aken." The crowd erupted in outrage, but Mama Aken stood silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Justice had come, but it was not enough. Not yet. As Karu was dragged away, A single crow landed on Aken's grave, its beady eyes watching. Chidi felt a hand brush hers. Cold, fleeting, and she knew her brother was still with them. Mama Aken tightened her grip on the knife. "This is not the end," she murmured. "The ones who helped him will pay too." The crow took flight, its shadow stretching like a blade across the ground. The morning after Karu's confession, villagers awoke to find their doorposts smeared with ash in the shape of handprints, small, like a child's. Women wailed as they scrubbed at the marks, but the stains wouldn't fade. Elder Nwok, who had accepted bribes to silence rumors about Papa Emma's death, found his prized rooster nailed to his doorstep, its wings spread like a dark angel. The message was clear. The spirit world had opened its eyes, and it was watching everyone. At the riverbank where women gathered to wash clothes, the water turned the color of rust whenever Mama Aken approached. Children pointed and whispered as her reflection showed not one face, but three. Her own, Aken's, and a third, shadowy figure no one recognized. When the village drunkard mocked this ghost story, he woke the next morning to find his mouth sewn shut with fishing line. The village held its collective breath, waiting for the next sign. No one dared speak against Mama Aken now. The annual harvest festival arrived, but no one felt like celebrating. Still, tradition demanded observance. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and palm wine, yet the food turned to ash in people's mouths. During the ceremonial dance, young Kemi screamed when her ankle-length braids suddenly unraveled and slithered to the ground like dead snakes. The drummers played faster, trying to drown out the growing panic, until their drums split open, releasing a flood of black beetles. Uncle Karu's remaining allies, 3 men who had helped bury Papa Emma, stumbled away from the feast, only to find their path blocked by a figure wrapped in burial cloths. When they turned to run the other way, Mama Aken stood waiting, a curved knife in one hand and Aken's childhood shirt in the other. "The dead are hungry tonight," she said calmly. "Will you feed them with confession or with your flesh?" The men fell to their knees, their voices tripping over each other in their haste to reveal truths buried for years. That night, lightning split the sky without rain, striking the same spot 7 times, the exact location where Papa Emma had been buried. By morning, the earth had split open, revealing a gruesome sight, his bones arranged in a perfect circle, the skull missing. Children reported seeing a tall figure carrying something round through the mist toward Mama Aken's compound. The village hunter followed the trail and returned white-faced, refusing to speak of what he'd seen. His hunting dogs, however, howled incessantly for 3 days before hanging themselves with their own leashes. Mama Aken emerged from her hut wearing her wedding clothes, now yellowed with age. In her hands, she carried 2 objects, Papa Emma's skull and the first yam harvested from the cursed land. She placed both at the center of the village square and called for a gathering. "The time for hiding is over," she declared. "Tonight, the earth will claim what it is owed." As if in response, the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. Several villagers fainted. Others ran to pack their belongings, suddenly remembering urgent business in distant towns. 7 women came to Mama Aken's door at dusk, mothers who had lost children to unexplained illnesses after the deaths of Papa Emma and Aken. Each brought a knife, stolen from her husband's tools. Without a word, Mama Aken led them to a fire behind her hut, where 7 clay pots bubbled with strange-smelling concoctions. One by one, the women dipped their blades into the mixtures, which hissed and turned the metal black. "Cut nothing living," Mama Aken instructed, "but place them where the guilty sleep." At midnight, a scream tore through the village, then another and another. Men burst from their huts clutching their chests, where black handprints bloomed over their hearts. The village midwife, known for her discreet abortions, found her supply of herbs replaced with grave dirt. The butcher who had supplied the meat for Aken's funeral feast discovered his entire stock covered in maggots. And in the center of it all, Mama Aken sat on a stool outside her hut, plaiting her hair with fingers stained dark with medicine, humming a lullaby Aken had loved as a child. A week of terror passed before the elders begged for mercy. They found Mama Aken sitting in the empty schoolhouse, surrounded by carved wooden figures representing every villager. Some figures stood upright. Others lay on their sides. A few were buried up to their necks in a tray of soil. "I am not your judge," she told the trembling elders. "The dead decide." She pointed to a large figure in the center, unmistakably Papa Emma, whose outstretched hands held a small scale. On one side sat a stone, on the other, nothing. That afternoon, the village well turned red. Women drawing water screamed as the rope came up dripping what looked like blood. A brave boy peered over the edge and swore he saw faces looking back up at him. Papa Emma's on the left, Aken's on the right, and between them, a woman no one recognized. When Mama Aken approached the well, the water cleared instantly. She lowered a calabash and drank deeply before announcing, "3 more days of reckoning remain." That night, 7 families packed their belongings and fled into the bush, preferring the danger of wild animals to the wrath of the dead. On the 3rd day, the remaining villagers gathered in the square to witness something extraordinary. Mama Aken emerged wearing Aken's clothes, her movements unnervingly like her dead son's. She spoke in his voice, recited his childhood jokes, even scratched behind his ear exactly as he used to. The performance chilled even the bravest spectators. "My mother has shown you mercy," the Aken voice said, "but the land remembers. Work it together, share its bounty, or it will reject you as it rejected the greedy." As suddenly as it began, the possession ended. Mama Aken collapsed, then rose as herself, looking decades older. She walked slowly to the disputed farmland and drove a single knife into the soil. "This land is no one's now. It belongs to the ancestors." The villagers dispersed quietly, but the real shock came at sunset. Every knife in the village, from cooking knives to machetes, had vanished. Only the one in the field remained, its handle vibrating slightly as if gripped by an invisible hand. Peace returned to the village, but it was an uneasy truce. Crops grew again, though some families' yams came up twisted into screaming faces. Children played, but avoided the path where Aken had stepped on the death charm. At night, people reported hearing 2 sets of footsteps outside their homes, one heavy like a man's, one light like a boy's, but no one ever appeared when they checked. Mama Aken resumed her normal routines, though she often spoke to empty chairs and set out 2 meals instead of 1. Chidi, now the only living child, watched her mother's strange behavior with growing concern. One evening, she followed Mama Aken to the burial ground and witnessed something impossible. Her mother in deep conversation with 2 faint, shimmering figures. When Chidi stepped on a twig, the figures vanished. Mama Aken turned slowly. "Some debts," she said calmly, "require more than 1 lifetime to repay." That night, Chidi packed a small bundle and slipped away before dawn, leaving only a note. "I will not wait for the dead to claim me too." The village celebrated 1 year since Aken's death with a subdued ceremony. Mama Aken did not attend. Instead, she was seen walking toward the river with a bundle of personal items, Aken's favorite shirt, Papa Emma's pipe, and her own wedding jewelry. When villagers checked her hut later, they found it empty except for 3 chairs arranged around a cold hearth. On the table lay 3 knives, one for each family member, all spotlessly clean. That same night, the village drunkard, who had miraculously recovered from his sewn-shut mouth, staggered home to find his path blocked by 3 figures standing in a row, 2 tall, 1 short. When he fell to his knees begging forgiveness, they disappeared. But the next morning, the entire village woke to find their doorways decorated with strange symbols drawn in ash. The only house without markings was Chidi's abandoned hut. The message was clear. The dead were keeping accounts, and no one knew when they would come to collect. Years passed. The village prospered, but certain traditions became law. No one farmed the disputed land, though it grew the greenest grass. No one spoke ill of the dead, especially not the Aken family. Children born after the events were warned not to play near Mama Aken's old hut, which remained standing but empty. Strange things still happened. Tools went missing and reappeared in odd places. Shadows sometimes moved against the wind, and every year on the anniversary of Aken's death, all the village knives had to be locked away or they'd vanish until morning. A new generation grew up hearing whispered stories about the widow who commanded the dead. Some claimed to see a woman in old-fashioned clothes walking the footpaths at dusk, sometimes accompanied by a tall man and a teenage boy. Others dismissed this as superstition, until the day a land developer from the city came to survey the area. After laughing at the villagers' warnings, he entered the old hut and was never seen again. His workers found only his expensive shoes, neatly placed at the doorstep, filled to the brim with freshly turned earth. On the 10th anniversary of Aken's death, a woman returned to the village. Chidi, now grown and carrying a sleeping toddler on her back. She went straight to the overgrown family compound and began clearing the weeds without a word to anyone. That night, villagers noticed candlelight in the long abandoned hut. In the morning, they found Chidi at the market, bargaining calmly for supplies as if she'd never left. When asked about her sudden return, she simply said, "The dead grow lonely." That evening, as the sun set, 3 figures could be seen walking toward the burial ground. Chidi, her child, and a shadowy 3rd figure that some swore had Mama Aken's distinctive limp. The next morning, a single knife stood upright in the center of the village square,